Our next reader is Margaret Talbot, and she's come from Washington, D.C. on an Acela Express, so everybody should applaud her for that. Margaret Talbot has been a staff writer for The New Yorker since 2003. Her first book, The Entertainer, Movies, Magic, and My Father's 20th Century, was published in 2013. And she's just had her first Natty Boh. Where is she? Okay. How did you like it?
I loved it.
Okay, so somebody can buy her another. You can come on upstairs.
All right, maybe I'll come around. Thank you very much, and that was a terrific reading. Thanks for sharing that. This is a little bit of a change of pace, I think. It kind of reminds me when they used to serve you sherbet at old-fashioned restaurants as like a palate cleanser before you moved on to the next meal. I'm going to read from a book that I wrote that came out last year. It's my first book, and it's about my dad, who was an actor who was born in 1902 and who happened to be this sort of Zelig-like figure who lived through many phases of entertainment history, starting in kind of the old weird America with traveling magic shows as a hypnotist assistant, having rocks broken on his chest. He was a shill in the audience who would come up. And in traveling tent theater shows in the Midwest. He ended up in Hollywood in the early 30s as a leading man and a founder of the Screen Actors Guild. Was in a lot of pre-code movies, Warner Brothers, gangster movies. Had sort of a turn, a dark and unfortunate turn in his own life when he went through a deeply alcoholic phase. And was in a lot of exploitation movies, including a couple of Ed Wood movies. He was an actor in the Ed Wood Company, in Glenda and Plan 9 from Outer Space. Yes, yes. So, and he had some interesting stories to tell about Ed. And he had then kind of come back in 50s sitcoms, family television. He was a regular on Ozzie and Harriet. So the book is really not a straight biography or a straight memoir or a straight history, but sort of an amalgam of the three, kind of telling a story about kind of the development of mass entertainment and fan culture and standards of beauty and kind of the infiltration of Hollywood into all of our minds through his story, through his adventures. But one of the things I found out about him in the course of writing the book, he was 60 when I was born, and my mom was 26 years younger than he was. And they sometimes would allude to my father having been married before, but it was always a little unclear how many times. So in the course of researching, I found out he'd been married a total of 5 times. But my mother was the one that stuck. That was the happy marriage. They were actually married 40 years, and she died first, although she was 26 years younger. And theirs was a great love story. But he had a lot of both interesting marriages and interesting girlfriends. So one of the things that I did in the book was to find out some more about some of those girlfriends, because it was kind of my parents' unspoken bargain that they didn't talk about his very, very active past. I remember once when I was a kid finding a photograph of a beautiful blonde starlet sort of cupping her breasts, and written on it, it said, "I'm holding my own till you get home, darling." And being very confused and intrigued by what that was, and neither of them had a good answer for me. So I'm going to read a section here about a girlfriend he had in the 30s, and it's just kind of her story. There was a new woman at Lyle's side, a countess no less. Lyle's my father's name, Lyle Talbot. Dorothy DeFrasso was a woman of large appetites and the resources to satisfy them. Flamboyant, fabulously rich, ridiculously well-connected in both society and Hollywood circles, DeFrasso was in between her most notorious affairs with Gary Cooper and the gangster Benjamin Bugsy Siegel when she amused herself with Lyle. She had grown up privileged in Watertown, New York, Manhattan, and Palm Beach, a frequent ornament to the society pages. Her father was a wealthy leather merchant turned financier from whom she would one day inherit millions of dollars. Her brother became the youngest governor of the New York Stock Exchange. As a young woman, Dorothy had married and divorced a swashbuckling British aviator, and at 35, she made a marriage of mutual convenience to a much older Italian count, Carlo Dentice di Frasso. It was an old story. He wanted the money, she wanted the title. All very amiable, she always told my father, and it did seem to be. With part of her inheritance, she and the Count bought and restored an extraordinary 16th century property called the Villa Madama, which had been built by Pope Clement VII and designed by Raphael. The Count stayed there with occasional visits from his wife until the villa was seized by Mussolini. No thanks, alas, to any anti-fascist resistance on the part of the merrily amoral de Frassos. They had entertained the dictator and his minions more than once, and indeed seized may be a bit of a post-war exaggeration. They may have given Il Duce the villa just because he expressed an interest. The de Frasso's friends in Italy were the sort of people who, when they woke up and noticed there was a war on, were annoyed that their footman had been called to military service. In 1931, when Gary Cooper made a visit to Europe, he met the Countess de Frasso, who immediately sized up his possibilities. She slept with him, bought him a new wardrobe, introduced him to society, and followed him back to Hollywood. De Frasso was no beauty. In photographs, she looks gimlet-eyed and a bit jowly, like a more matronly Wallace Simpson. But her wealth and generosity endeared her to good-looking men, as, to be fair to them, did her adventurousness and sense of style. When Cooper seemed to be straying, as he often would, and soon definitively, de Frasso arranged to take him on safari to Africa, with stops in Rome and Milan, first to buy some new outfits for the cowboy actor turned big game hunter. In Beverly Hills, the Countess lived in a house done up by the society decorator Elsie de Wolfe, in a fantasia of chinoiserie, mirrored paneling, and trompe-l'oeil bamboo molding, all rendered in a palette rich with jade and aquamarine. There she hosted a who's who of Hollywood guests. With a gleam in her eye, she amused her many friends with stories about Cooper and his implacable simplicity. Once on safari, she said, "The sun was setting, Gary was sitting by himself with an elbow on his knee, looking down on the ground. It was one of the most beautiful pictures I've ever seen. 'Oh, darling,' I said, 'what are you thinking?' He looked at me for a minute and said, 'I've been wondering whether I should change my brand of shoe polish.'" Given how much she liked to spend money, especially on her men, de Frasso was always finagling to turn her $12 million fortune into an even bigger pile. During her stint as the mistress of Bugsy Siegel, the ruthless blue-eyed gangster who charmed Hollywood in the late 30s and early 40s, de Frasso was especially drawn to bizarre, get-richer-quick schemes. In September 1938, she and Siegel set sail on a wooden schooner called the Metha Nelson, headed for the Pacific coast of Central America. They were in search of treasure, rubies, diamonds, and gold doubloons that was supposed to be buried on an uninhabited island off Costa Rica. The FBI suspected that Siegel was also trying to pick up a fugitive mobster who'd been hiding out somewhere in the vicinity and may have planted the captain aboard to keep an eye on the proceedings. It was an expedition worthy of the Maltese Falcon, and it ended even more ignominiously for the dramatis personae with the schooner's destruction in a gale, a mutiny by 2 of the crew members who claimed the captain was an anti-Semite who abused them, and no treasure. Then there was the time that de Frasso and Siegel tried to peddle a new kind of explosive to the Italian military. Siegel had met a couple of chemists who developed something they called atomite, which Siegel was convinced would replace dynamite and make him a fortune. De Frasso arranged to have the stuff demonstrated at the Villa Madama for a contingent from the Italian military. As it happened, her husband's other guests at the villa that weekend included Joseph Goebbels, the German propaganda minister, and Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe. Siegel evidently had no problem consorting with Italian fascists, but he was Jewish and he did bristle at the Nazi bigwigs. In fact, he told Dorothy he was going to kill that fat bastard Göring and that dirty Goebbels too. It's an easy setup the way they're walking around here. De Frasso talked him out of it, fearing what would happen to her count if his Nazi house guest ended up dead. The explosive test was a bust, and de Frasso and her mug headed for the French Riviera. Thanks to the Countess, Siegel had missed out on making the one defensible hit he'd ever have committed. For Lyle, as for Gary Cooper, de Frasso was an odd sort of mother hen, 14 years his senior, worldlier and wealthier than anyone he'd ever known. A few days before they were to spend vacation together at Hearst Castle, the Countess sent him a set of calfskin luggage, buttery soft and monogrammed. On the appointed day, she picked him up in her Rolls Royce with a chauffeur and a bar in the back. She could be kind in a breezy, imperious style, When Lyle's father, Ed Henderson, and stepmother, Anna, were visiting from Omaha, Nebraska, the Countess made sure that her friend Mary Pickford gave a tea in their honor. Pickford invited them back the next day for dinner, and the Hendersons of Omaha were surprised to find themselves hobnobbing with assorted European aristocrats, including a Swedish baroness and a count of some sort. After the meal, cigarettes were passed around on little silver trays, and Ed accepted one to be sociable, even though he never smoked. He took a couple of puffs, then set the cigarette down and forgot about it, till he noticed a big hole in the tablecloth. He put an ashtray on top of it, and on the way home confessed to DeFrasso, saying he hoped that, since there had been no place cards, his hostess wouldn't know who had done it. Well, she couldn't set his mind at ease on that front. The truth was that though the seating arrangement looked spontaneous, the guests had all been maneuvered into place according to a seating chart in the kitchen. But it didn't really matter, she went on. The tablecloth was insured for $1,000. Neither a diamond in the rough like Cooper, nor a rough with diamonds like Siegel. Lyle couldn't have lasted long as a DeFrasso project. Perhaps she tired of him first, perhaps it was the other way around. In any case, they both got busy quickly.